Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. Before we get started, I want to remind you we have a live event coming up on September 29th. It's going to be at Racket right here in Chelsea. I'm going to be on with my colleagues, Bobby Kuza and Courtney Gross. We're going to do a live joint podcast for their podcast, Off Topic on Politics, and this podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. Doors open at 5:30 p.m. The tickets are free, but you have to RSVP. Head to NY1.com or the Spectrum News app. You'll get more information and you can RSVP there, and I hope to see you there. On to today's episode. This week, I'm joined by Steve Kornacki. He is the chief data analyst for NBC News and NBC Sports. He is a regular on Meet the Press. You've seen him on Today, the nightly news. You've seen him especially around election time, working that magic board, taking you into obscure little counties to tell you what they mean and what it all is going to lead to in big national races. He's sort of a household name. He's got some celebrity followers. Really good guy. We've been working together on different things, on different panels for a long, long time, and he's here to talk about that and give us some guidance on the race for mayor. Thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Errol, great to be here.
We'll get to the race for mayor in a second, but first, MSNBC and NBC sort of split. And some people went one way, some people went the other way. You ended up with the big company with NBC.
I'm NBC.
Sounds like
NBC.
a wise choice.
Yep.
Sounds like a wise choice.
Yeah.
What was that about? What went into that for you?
MS doesn't have the NFL, the Kentucky Derby, the Olympic. I mean, it's I've getting to do the sports stuff, as you mentioned there in the intro, is like sort of dream come true stuff for me. Didn't expect it, my whole career. Feel I got really lucky, love it, and they've been great to me. And so I've just enjoyed this mix of sort of elections, sports, getting to live in both worlds.
Yeah.
And so the chance to continue doing that is a great thing.
So, I mean, it looks like a ton of fun, but for you, is it work when it's like, oh, here comes the Final Four. I gotta run some numbers. I gotta do some research. I gotta put something together.
Yeah, not as much. It's weird. It's like I don't, the folks who are there day to day doing it, who I work with, they're working super hard. We do an event like the Kentucky Derby. You get down there a few days early. They set up their own, NBC sets up their own sort of production city. Yeah. And these are long, long days and nights.
Yes.
And it may be just that I'm new enough to it. It may be that it's still a novelty to me to get to work in it, that I work really long days and I don't feel it at all. I love it. And it's sort of, I'm still at the kind of pinch me, is this real, stage.
I love what you did with the horse races. My dad, my late father, was really, really into horses. Dragged me around to a lot of OTB parlors and out to the track, the Belmont. Nice. Never for the stakes, for the third leg of the Triple Crown, but the Belmont is a beautiful track. We'd go down to the paddock, look at the horses. He explained to me what he was doing. I actually learned a lot, about a smart bet as opposed to a winning bet.
Maybe you can teach me something. I'm still looking for that.
No. Oh, no, my friend. Oh, no, you don't, because I've got it here in my notes. You actually picked the winner of the Kentucky Derby, and it paid 12-1. I mean, now, first of all, I hope you made a little money on that.
Well,
did they let you do that?
Yeah, the answer is yes. That was the first one. That was 2021, and they put me on it. And now this is when I felt enormous pressure. I mean, they do it for fun. Everybody on the air is making, you got to do it. But I felt like, look, I'm kind of the new guy. People are looking at me saying, is this a gimmick? I really wanted to get that one right. So, I agonized over that one. And the horse, so I picked the horse. I said, I think this horse is going to get to the front. Maybe he can keep there, 12-1. So I bet the horse, and goes to the front, takes him all the way around, holds off 3 rivals in the stretch, hits it 12-1. And I'm feeling incredibly smart at that moment and everything. Now, the postscript to the story was that horse was named Medina Spirit.
Yes.
And you may remember, it turned out flunked the drug test a week later.
Oops.
And so officially, if you go back and look at that Derby, Medina Spirit's no longer the winner of the Derby. But they can't take the money back, so I kept the money.
Oh, okay, there you go. Okay, well, that's a win. We'll call it. In New York, that counts as a win. Very good, very good. As far as the split with MSNBC, and I know, small fry like us, we don't get to make the corporate decisions, but why would they build up that much brand equity? I mean, MSNBC, that's 2 of the biggest names in communications in American history. Microsoft and NBC, sterling blue chip companies. And then they say, let's just call it whatever they're going to call it, some new thing, right?
Yeah. Well, the MS has been out for a long time. Microsoft left, years ago. So
that is true.
It's already kind of been reduced to that. And it's just, an interesting one is, I think there's a legal reason on this, is my understanding of it, because this split to legally work, there has to be total separation, I think, even in like name and identity. And the interesting story on this that I had no idea about is, look, the NBC and MSNBC is NBC.
Right.
So there's also CNBC, which is splitting off. And you say, well, they got to do it too, right?
Well, where'd they end up?
So they're separate now. They're part of the spinoff.
Interesting.
So, but they're keeping the name. So how can NBC keep it and not MS? Because the NBC, it's the cable news and business channel. They were being cute with it all these years ago, or some people say they had the foresight to know this might be coming, so they can still go CNBC.
Okay, very interesting. I watch them most mornings as well. Okay, let's talk numbers. I spent a lot of time in graduate school studying polling. I know, I'm sure you encounter this all the time. There's a lot of distrust from the public about the accuracy of surveys. My sense of it is that people just don't understand probability as well as somebody who's gone to graduate school and actually dug down into it, or somebody who's been, as I have, been looking at this for 40 years, and you sort of see how polls go and how margin of error really works. And you know, directionally, they're almost always broadly right. And specifically, they actually come in pretty well most of the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of, thoughts on this, obviously, because we just, I kind of live in it for so much of the year. First thing I always tell people is this is, me being a good corporate citizen, but I think it's also true. Our final NBC poll, Sunday before this presidential election, we had it 48-48. Final margin was 49-48. So I always say, look, I think we have a good poll, and we're not the only ones, but I don't think these things are as broken as people think they are. But I do think we're running up against something. Two things I think are happening. Number one is that I think our elections, especially at the national level, have just gotten closer. 2016, Trump stitches together just the right combination in 3 states. He's elected. 2020 took 5 days. You know how this goes. So these are being decided around the margins right now. And I think people are more invested in politics now, certainly than they were a generation ago, really any time I think in modern history. So the outcome matters to people now in a way it didn't before at scale. And the margins are close. And people look to polling for they expect a level of exactness in the polling. So a poll that's off a couple points in an atmosphere where those couple points are going to make the difference between one candidate winning and one candidate losing, I think is going to really magnify the idea that the poll misses. And so I think that's a major thing. I mean, there's other issues too. I think, look, Trump himself, just his presence there's all sorts of theories why, but there's no question his presence has affected polling in ways that I think pollsters have somewhat accounted for, but not entirely. But I think
say more about that. What
it started? Yeah, it started in 2016, and I think if you remember in 2016, the biggest misses in 2016 were like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Clinton was winning big in all the polling right there, and then Trump goes and wins all 3 states. And so what happened was traditionally, this was, if you were taking a poll of Wisconsin, it's 86% white, close to 90% white. So if your polling sample matched that, you had a good poll, right? It's 88% white, that's the state, okay. Right. What they realized in 2016 was that the white vote was splitting into 2 categories, whites with a college degree and whites without a 4-year college degree. And now they're voting like 50 points apart. The without a college degree is Trump, the with is Democratic. And so what they ended up looking back and saying was, oh, wow, we got too many whites with degrees. The share of the white vote that's with a degree way off in our poll. It exaggerated Democratic support, and then Trump got massive surge, unexpected turnout. So they start weighting by education, meaning they're going to account for what I'm telling you in the polling. That's what they started doing in 2020. You may remember 2020, polls missed pretty badly in those states again. Biden won them, but not by anywhere near the margin he had. And so that was when you started getting into what they called like sort of the shy Trump. So were these folks who were they misleading pollsters when they got them on the phone? Or what I think was happening was pollsters just weren't getting them on the phone. Either they weren't answering the phone or they were hearing that it was a pollster and they were hanging up. So the effort was being made to get these voters into the sample. They were conscious of it, but they still weren't actually getting these voters into the poll.
Right.
And so that was the big backdrop to 2024 was this going to happen again? it didn't really happen in 2020. I think the polling was just on the whole, it was not perfect. It was still a little bit more Democratic than the result in those 3 states, but it wasn't anything like the miss we had before. So I think that phenomenon, and there's a lot of different explanations for why it could be, that phenomenon eased. But the other thing I would just note is like in the elections without Trump on the ballot in this period of time,
right,
the polling has been better on the whole, significantly better.
Do we need to maybe shift to, as a broadcaster, I know it would be almost impossible to do this in a smooth way, but you, me, and a lot of the analysts that I know actually open up a poll and don't just look at the cross tabulations, but really look at the model, because that's really what you're talking about, right? People, the pollsters, the art part of it that underlies a lot of the science is they're making an assumption about who's going to turn out, right? So if a certain number of white voters or black voters, Latino, whatever it may be, they're going to compare it to prior election cycles and also maybe adjust if they know of some other factors that are out there. And that's just art. That's sort of analysis. Do we need to explain that to people when we're putting a poll out, saying like, look, this is the poll. They're assuming that broadly that the electorate is going to look like the electorate looked like 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I try to do, some version of that, because what I try to do is, first of all, there's the question of turnout, and then there's just the question, too, of like, are we getting the, I'll give you a good example. In 2024, the biggest question looking at the polling was, Trump seemed to be doing better with Latino voters.
Yes.
Doing better than Republicans had ever done. Is this real or not?
Right.
And there was a lot of pushback to the idea that this was real. And there were some sort of activist groups on the left that were putting out data of their own saying, oh no, this is kind of a mirage. This is a better sample of the. So this was very much in dispute. And so, and I quickly realized as we're putting these numbers out, in our polling, the thing, Trump being tied with Harris in a poll or a point ahead or whatever, kind of hinged on this being real because we were finding it. So I made a point of emphasis in what we did in the run to 2024 was sort of like, is this real? Here, we did a lot of reporting around this too, and then pointing ahead to election night, like, here are the places we're going to look as soon as the polls close. And the one that's always in my head is Osceola County, Florida, which is right outside Orlando. And the polls close at 7 o'clock Florida, and they get you good results quick in Florida. And this is, it's majority Hispanic, has one of the largest concentrations of Puerto Rican voters anywhere in the country. And it's one of those that Trump had lost by 25 points in 2016. He cut it down to 14 points in 2020. So my test going into election night 24 was like, does this stall? Does this regress?
Right.
Does this? So I see at like 7:35 p.m. he's won Osceola by 2 points. And to me, it's like question answered. Now we know, and now I know as I'm going to go through the rest of this night, there's all these other places, these cities in Pennsylvania, you're going to start seeing, and then we started seeing it everywhere.
Very, very interesting. So with that as our backdrop, let's talk about New York politics. We've seen at least 4, maybe 5 quality polls for mayor in the last 10 days. How do you read them? They're all pointing mostly in the direction of, Mamdani with a, 20-odd point lead over the next closest rival, which is Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, you guys are getting spoiled here. The Virginia and New Jersey are getting jealous. Where's the poll? Where's the Virginia poll? Let's go. It's funny how that happens sometimes. I've been in these meetings where it's sort of like, we decide this is the place we want to poll. This is the date we want to do it. And then you get to that week and it's like, oh, shoot, CNN did it too. Or in this case, 5 all did it at once. But from an analytical standpoint, it's great because I think we really have a robust sense
Marist,
of this now.
Siena, Quinnipiac, they're not all wrong in the same way at the same time.
Right. And like you're saying, I think there's convergence here in the numbers. And that is that, look, in the splintered field, Mamdani is just running laps around these guys. The political deficiencies, liabilities of his opponents are, through the roof, preventing them from making gains. And then if you get into the hypothetical, thin it down, whether it's a one-on-one Cuomo-Mamdani or whether you're leaving Sliwa in but taking Adams out, the closest I think Cuomo got in one of those was 7 points.
Right.
You're looking at about a 7, depending on the matchup, 7 to 12, 15 point spread. So I think we have a really good sense of where it is right now.
Do you have a prediction yet? Are you going to make a prediction in that race?
I always say I leave the predictions for horse racing. I always give myself the wiggle room. But no. I mean, look, I won't punt too much. I mean, it's like I think in a splintered field, barring the dramatic unforeseen event, I can't see Mamdani losing in a splintered field that we have right now. I just think the liabilities of his opponents are way too intense. Now, if something happens to sort of condense this race more into a one-on-one race, I'm more curious and less. I'll start looking for the wiggle room there.
Yeah.
The way it is right now, I think he's in very good position.
Well, and the key there is the unforeseen, which New York is famous for.
Yep.
Something always kind of happens coming down the home stretch. We just don't know what it's going to be. There's a bump in first-time voters, that threw off, I think, a lot of people's calculations, both the strategists and the pollsters, frankly, in the primary, because Cuomo was leading by blowout numbers, and then it turned out, when the dust settled, and we figured that out fairly quickly, it turned out that there's a whole universe of new voters. There were young voters who came out in big, big numbers, and by young, I just mean anybody under 40. There was a whole cohort of Muslim voters, and especially South Asian voters, who had been catered to by the Mamdani campaign and basically overlooked by the other campaigns and probably by the pollsters as well, right?
And there's a bit of a parallel here to, just in terms of the phenomenon. There's a little parallel to Trump that I see, just in that, we were talking about 2016 a minute ago. It was a set of voters that played a much bigger role than people were accustomed to them playing. And in 2016, this was rural, older, blue-collar white voters who came out in numbers that we had just conditioned ourselves to think would never happen. And I think I draw the parallel because I remember certainly myself and I think others in the run-up to the primary this year. Here, we're looking at it and saying, well, look, Cuomo is doing best with older voters, non-college educated voters, black voters. These are the groups you want to be doing the best with to win, because these are the groups that turn out and vote. Right. And then, like you're saying, you start looking at it and you're saying, wow, the balance here is going completely in a new direction, that we haven't seen before, and look at the effect.
Well, yeah, in fact, I mean, what do you need to see to tell you whether this is, as opposed to a flash in the pan, the building or the emergence of a new coalition?
I think in this case, first of all, I think we've gotten hints of this, I would say, because one of the things that jumps out at me in the polling is, you'll see gaps in age groups sometimes, but this is a chasm.
Yes.
When you go under 45, over 45, when you go under 30, over 65, and you compare these groups, they're just living on two completely different planets. However, we've seen hints of this in certainly Democratic politics for a while now. Bernie Sanders, the Sanders phenomenon, you would just see his numbers with young voters under 45 versus older. So some of this has been there before, and I think is just sort of it's real and it's there. In terms of what the coalition that Mamdani is building, see if he wins in the first place, obviously, but then can this endure him governing? Right. Can this endure, again, it's what Mario Cuomo, I'm in New York, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. Can this endure the prose? Or does the coalition start to splinter there? And does this become, more, I can remember, de Blasio winning in 2013, and there were some pretty grand prognostications about what this unique coalition he put together meant. And I don't know that long. He was a two-term mayor, but
I will always remember 2013 as the first race in my memory in New York where a quality, plausible, well-funded black candidate did not carry the black vote. Bill Thompson lost the black vote to de Blasio. I didn't even think that was possible. Yeah. I don't think anybody had even considered it, and it was kind of like, wow, why did this happen? And I don't know if it was neighborhood by neighborhood, but it helped that he was in a multiracial family. And I think, even to this day, I'm not sure I would put my finger on anything other than affordability, which was the issue then, the sleeper issue then, as it was the sleeper issue this year.
What I remember with him, too, was this idea of, stop and frisk, not just as stop and frisk itself, but as a broader sort of turning of the page from a sort of style of police. And I think that might have tapped into some age and generational stuff, too.
Oh, that's an interesting point. And Bill Thompson, right, He was not emphatically promising to undo it.
Right.
He was, it was clear that he wasn't happy with it. He was going to make some changes, but de Blasio really made that like sort of the centerpiece of everything, which I guess makes it a whole lot different. So as you were doing, I remember you and I used to show up on CNN and a couple of other places together, and I remember thinking, because at the time it wasn't all data. It wasn't data driven. We were all just kind of trying to like figure out stuff. This is in the Obama years. Were you always kind of privately like looking at numbers and running numbers, or did that sort of find its way into your repertoire?
Yeah, no. I've kind of always been that way, and I was always kind of like, looking for so much more is possible now than it was at the start of my career. That's what I always tell people when, because I'll get the question going around talking to colleges and stuff, and they'll say, how do I get to sort of the kind of job you have? And it's sort of, I think back to when I, left college, and as the signature sort of election night moment around that time was the 2000 election, coming right down to Florida. And if you remember that night, it's just how close it got. And what was it? It was Tim Russer sitting in a chair like this with a grease board, writing Oregon, Iowa, and then Florida. Right, that was the technology I found at NBC before that election. They had, the map. So right now I'd go to the interactive screen. I would tap a state. It would change colors or whatever. That's what we do now. We've done that for a while. In 2000, they had this wall in the Today Show studio, and each state was a physical tile that you
like
could
blocks,
flip.
like
One side was red and one side was blue. And it was like
great.
Dangling there like puzzle pieces.
Wow.
This is just in 2000. So that was the level of sophistication we had back then. This has all changed in my career.
Yeah, no, that's true. And of course, the internet hasn't even been around that long. And and then of course, there's all different reporting standards. So when the numbers come in is fundamentally different. I mean, one of my childhood memories was staying up late night to see the results of the 72 presidential
That shouldn't have taken too late. No,
that was like 2:30 in the morning.
That was a pretty quick one. No.
Well, it was. This is true. I do remember.
You wanted to see if Massachusetts would hold.
well, I mean, I remember the concession speech was like in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
It was a strange and odd night. So we've got a lot of different things that are being talked about as far as where national politics are going. So. I saw something that you wrote. I'll read it back to you, and then we can talk about it. You wrote that even if Republicans do emerge from a fresh round of redistricting with a batch of new safe seats, talking about the midterms, it may still be woefully insufficient to keep the House, given the dramatic losses that the party in the White House often endures in midterm elections. In fact, regularly endures. And you note that in the first Trump presidency, the Republicans lost 40 seats in the first midterms in 2018, easily losing control of the chamber. Is that the default assumption of what we're likely to see next year?
It was before the last 2 months, I would say, because the Republicans, I mean, it's so narrow right now that as it currently stands, if the Republicans lose more than 2 seats, they lose the House. And if you just want to look, historically at that, you can find 3 elections in the last century, 3 midterm elections where that didn't happen to the White House party. And they came with massive this you're talking about post 9/11, Clinton impeachment, Great Depression. Those are your 3. So, as dramatic as events are these days, it doesn't seem quite like that. Now, that said, if you look at the map in Texas, if Republicans get what they want out of that, that's 5 new seats. So suddenly instead of 2, you're talking about 7. Now you're looking at a host of other, Ohio's going to do this. I think Republicans could get 3 out of Ohio. Florida's going to do it. I think they could get 3 there. Now you're over 10. There's a couple other states, Indiana, Missouri. So you could see them getting on their own, just drawing their way to a pad of closer to 15 seats. The Democrats are going to try to counter this in California. We'll find out this November if they can. That would knock it down to like 10. Maryland, I think Democrats are going to go for. I think if it's maximum warfare on redistricting and each party does what it can do, I think the Republican pad is going to be something like 8 to 10 seats instead of 2. Now, I think that still makes them the underdog. But if you use, you said 2018 a minute ago, but if you use 2022, the Biden midterm, that's right. That's Democrats lost 8. Or 10. Excuse me. So that's right at the cusp. Then it becomes more interesting.
Very interesting. What would tip you off that the Democrats might not be able to sort of pull it off the way history normally works out?
3 things I'm looking at. The obvious one we always talk about is Trump's approval rating, which is it's not great. It's never been great, but it's not it's not at 40-seat loss level yet, definitely. Second is voter registration at the state level. I've kind of been a late convert to this, but I do think it's relevant. And you're still seeing Republicans gaining in the month-to-month reports in these states since the 20. I mean, they made huge gains between 20 and 24. But they've continued. And if you looked at 17 and 18, 2017, 2018, heading into that big Democratic midterm, you didn't see then what we're seeing now on the registration front. So I think that's interesting, and I think that might relate to the third thing that I look at, and it's also a difference between now and 2018. The Democratic Party's image in polling. They poll worse than the Republicans right now. The Republicans don't poll well, and Trump doesn't poll well, but the Democrats as a party poll worse. And when they had that 40-seat gain in 2018, they were polling better than the Republicans. So if you talk to Republicans and you say, tell me your scenario for keeping the House, they say two things. They say, we're going to draw our way into a bigger, safety net here. And secondly, this is going to be, in part, a referendum on the Democratic Party. And either people who will be inclined normally to vote against the White House party are going to pause because they won't vote for the Democrats and they'll vote Republican, or they say they just won't vote because they don't want to.
What is going on here? I'm looking at this Wall Street Journal poll. Democratic Party's image is at its lowest point in more than 30 years. 8%, only 8% of registered voters say they view the Democratic Party, quote, very favorably, meaning Democrats are, less popular than a dead skunk for some reason. Is this a bandwagon effect? I
think the party just endured quite a bit of damage the last 4 years. I think having Biden as their leader, as all of that played out around him, and I think it's continued to. There's just continues to be new reporting about his state, about what was going on sort of in the White House around him and all of that. I think that has had an enormous impact. I think the party sort of they've had an older generation leading them as their sort of face at the congressional level. That's it's starting to change. Hakeem Jeffries taking over for Nancy Pelosi a few years ago.
Well, and then 3 Democrats died in office this year, right? That's one,
exactly.
One way or another, the wheel is going to turn.
And you ask for, and this is an interesting question because you look at 2028. People are talking to me all the time who they think is going to be who's going to be the Democratic candidate in 28, and it's like you really I don't know. You never know, but it's like I couldn't even, point to somebody right now as like, yeah, look, gun to my head, I think this is the most likely. I really don't know. It's wide open. But I think that deprives the party of a clear voice, a couple clear faces that are identified with it outside of these congressional leaders who I think are doing nothing to move the needle for them.
Yeah. I'm assuming that when the Republican budget cuts hit, or the effect of them, and I understand they're trying to time them strategically so that many of the worst effects will be felt after the election, but there's a lot of reporting, and there's a lot of, frankly, at the state level, there are people who are doing what they have to do responsibly, which is anticipate the cuts and start informing people, we're closing this rural hospital, we're cutting back on these services, and so forth and so on. I can't imagine that the level of popularity the party overall has is going to continue as these headlines keep hitting locally.
I've certainly I hear that, and I wonder about it because what I wonder in politics too is like when the effect of something is far removed in terms of the calendar or whatever from the source of it. I wonder how much people really make these connections in terms of, so I'll give you a counterexample to this would be, I heard from Democrats in 2009 when the stimulus went through, the Obama stimulus, that
this will save us,
because all these projects are going to start popping up, shovel-ready projects, and people are going to see and feel this in their communities, and 2010 becomes one of the most catastrophic midterms ever. Now, Obama gets reelected. I don't think it did much to stem the tide of opposition to Obama and the sort of Tea Party backlash in the way they believed it would, even though a lot of these projects did come to fruition.
Yeah, well, right. What was shovel-ready was, the grave of the Democrats in 1,000 different, literally 1,000 districts around the country. So when we watch all of these different, when my listeners, when our viewers see these dramatic events like the recent murder of Charlie Kirk, the destruction of major agencies, the mass deportation campaign, people in masks, snatching up people, Does that start to move the needle? Is that something you're going to follow, or are you going to wait for the polling to see how it's being interpreted?
Yeah, no, I mean, I look at the polling because I think what's interesting on Trump's numbers, we say overall his approval rating is, give or take 43%, somewhere around there right now. His highest marks come on immigration or the border. And we did an interesting thing in our most recent poll, I thought, where, there's a couple different facets of this question. Is there going to be a difference in opinion depending on which facet you poll? So one question we asked half the respondents was, do you approve of Trump's performance on immigration and the border? Okay. And then we asked the other half, do you approve of him on immigration and deportations? So is that, border deport? Right. It was a 4-point difference. But each one still represented his best marks as president, above inflation, tariffs, any of these other issues. So he's still, again, we're not talking like 70% approval or anything, but relative to his overall standing, I think it remains a political, strength for him, at least as of right now.
100 years ago, we actually had a major closing of the borders, right? The Immigration Restriction League, and then all of this affiliated legislation that kept a lot of people out. And it usually comes up in the context of what subsequently happened to people who were trying to escape fascist tyranny in Europe, and they were kept out. They were unable to escape as the Nazis took over most of the continent. Putting that aside, though, I wonder if you have a model or would be interested in a model of how that worked out, because it reminds me of one of these things like prohibition, where it's kind of like, okay, it kind of got done in a funky way, but it was generally popular. And then after a while, it was completely unpopular. I think the same thing happened with the immigration restrictions. It, for economic reasons, for cultural reasons, the war, of course, blew everything else out eventually. But I wonder if we're going to sort of see a different opinion about this as the effects of the mass deportation campaign are get to be known.
I think it's a fair question, and I think also the individual cases, because we in general, when you've got sort of a story, a moment, a situation that grabs the country's attention, we always have seen how this can move public opinion quickly. And I think when you're talking about something like this, we've already seen a few. I mean, I could absolutely see there being a particular case, that grabs attention and that moves the needle. It's sort of in the same way that, I think what damaged Biden and the Democrats on this issue, and then that gave Trump the opening, that he had, were sort of the scenes from the southern border during Biden's presidency. And just this sense people had looking at that is there any control going on here at all? And I think there was sort of just a steady drumbeat of that. And it's interesting because if you look at what Trump's done on the border, I would say what the effect of the last 6 months on the border down there is the crossings are way down. Where there was a ton of activity, there's none now. And these things could be, political victories for Trump. And in some ways, I think he's getting credit for them. But it's not stopping there. And that, I think that does raise a question.
Right. No, I mean, the headlines, are the ones that catch my eye, because there's at least once a week, there's something about a U.S. citizen who was, seized by people in masks, who wouldn't listen to any kind of explanation. And they were either, dragged halfway across the country and dumped into jail, or actually deported and taken out of the country. And to me, these are horrifying. I know in those communities and certainly for those families, but overall, I'm curious as to whether or not there are people saying, well, yeah, that's what we signed up for. It was never going to be pretty, and it was never going to be exact. And if somebody got yanked out of their school, humiliated in front of their community, and deported to El Salvador, so be it. I can't quite imagine that would be a popular position, but, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't seen evidence. I've certainly seen, my read on it is the existing opposition to Trump is extremely animated, by this, and it's energized and added more fuel to a movement that already had a lot of it. Just looking at the poll numbers on it, I don't see a broader, backlash that's taken hold yet. One thing I'm interested in, though, and we'll see a little bit of this in the New Jersey gubernatorial election and Virginia, but New Jersey, there's some places I'm looking at in particular. These communities that do have, where a lot of these raids are playing out, that do have large undocumented populations, where Trump made significant gains in 2020. Places, Passaic, New Jersey, Paterson, New Jersey, large Hispanic population, Union City, places like this. I'm curious, the governor's race there this year, does that revert to the mean? Does that revert to what Democrats used to do there, except in 2024? I don't think that answers the question, but I'm very curious.
Well, it's interesting because as you're saying this, I'm thinking the person with the president with the record as far as annual deportations was Obama, right? And he got himself reelected. So there was something about that either didn't bother people or maybe some voters actually liked it. So, I guess it's an open question.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it was the polling was telling me, screaming at me last year that this was a political strength for Trump. And maybe more so a political weakness for Democrats, and he then became the vehicle for capitalizing, on that. And it's been striking to me, like I said, because his numbers, he is a figure who, whether you like him or not, everybody seems has a pretty fixed opinion of Donald Trump. His approval rating, the range that his approval rating moves as president between its lowest and highest, is more narrow than any president I've ever seen, and yet. Even with that being the case, I'm looking at polling on immigration and the border for him that steps outside that zone in a positive direction. So it's striking to me that, I think an issue that powered him in 2024, an issue that I think really hurt Democrats in 2024, I think there's a chunk of voters out there who are definitely not nuts about Donald Trump, who are looking at it and probably saying some version of, well, something needed to be done. I think that's currently their read on it.
Are you allowed to sit with strategists? I imagine DNC types would want to pull you aside and buy you a cup of coffee.
I'll listen. I'll listen to anybody's spin. I always say.
Well, no. They want to hear. I would hope that they would want to hear from you, right?
These places spend big bucks too. I'm always curious. It's always interesting to me to hear how they're looking at it when you're getting a real conversation with them about tactical decisions that they need to make and how they're going to allocate resources and things like that. It's always
one of our local issues that's becoming national is an affiliation with the DSA, is saying that you're a democratic socialist. Is that unthinkable, end of the road? Is that going to kill your candidacy? Now, Mamdani is a very interesting example because it doesn't seem to be hurting him at all. Same was true for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I looked up, I didn't realize that there's something on the order of 250 DSA office holders around the country. The number jumped dramatically after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won. Is that relevant? I mean, there are some national Democrats that are trying to keep their distance.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're not talking about from far away. We're talking about Tom Suozzi in Nassau County saying, I want nothing to do with this guy. This is political poison for me. Yeah. And he's got a piece of New York City in his district.
Yeah. I think that gets to it, though, because I think it depends where you are. But something that's striking to me, Gallup tests this over time. They test opinion of socialism, opinion of capitalism. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of them? And they just came out with their newest in the last week or two. Among Democrats, socialism tests better than capitalism. And there's a lot, into that. But that's
got to be generational.
That surprised me. Obviously, that surprised me. There's a generational component, and there's also a change that takes place, because this is historical data. There's a change that takes place around 2010, post-crash, post-meltdown, 2008. So I think that contributed to it as well.
Right.
But I think it's somebody like me who, grew up at the tail end of the Cold War, and the triumphant 1990s when the U.S. had defeated, and Cuba was just becoming more and more sort of obsolete politically. I had this sense that, socialism as a political force was in retreat, and it was this poisonous thing and all that politically. And I've had to readjust my understanding of the political atmosphere, that it's not in certain places. And I think within the Democratic Party, so you're talking about a place like New York City, you're talking about deeply Democratic city. So if these are Gallup's numbers for Democrats nationally, I can imagine in a place like New York City, it's more Democratic and more liberal, I think, on the whole. I suspect those numbers would be even better in the socialism versus capitalism direction here from the socialist standpoint. So I don't think it's in a place like this, in an election like this, nearly the stigma that I was sort of conditioned to believe it is. But that doesn't mean that in a place like Tom Suozzi's district now, where you're getting into the suburbs and you're getting into Nassau County.
Some older voters who remember.
The Cold War. I would say, listen, I remember, think back to nobody wants to think back to the winter of 2020 when COVID hit, but right before COVID hit, if you remember, Bernie Sanders was on a roll in the Democratic primaries.
Absolutely.
And there was that brief moment when it looked like Sanders was going to be the nominee. And this is in the run-up to South Carolina. And Sanders was asked, this is before the Clyburn thing, Sanders was asked about Fidel Castro and Cuba. And he would not repudiate Castro, and he wouldn't go after Castro.
Wow.
And I'm looking at it, I'm like, South Carolina has one of the oldest electorates.
Sure.
And these are people who remember the view of socialism, I'm telling you, was predominant. These are people who still very much had it within the Democratic Party. And I think that's when he hit the wall. I think there was a receptiveness to lining up with Sanders that was starting to take hold. And I think they looked at that and they said, what is this? This is not where we want to go. And I think that stalled him, and I think that opened it up for Biden, and I think Clyburn came in, and then it all went there for Biden real fast. But so I mean, it's still, there's an example of the old politics.
Well, I heard a prediction that Mamdani, assuming he becomes mayor, would govern as and be interpreted as like one of these European technocratic socialists, meaning like, yes, technically you're a socialist, but like IKEA. IKEA Swedish type of socialism where everything is basically upper middle class or geared in that direction. There's a big tax bite. There's a lot of government programs, but for the most part, it's recognizably capitalist as far as the day-to-day functioning of the economy. I don't know where this is heading, but I was curious as to what the numbers indicate, and it suggests that this could be where the whole party ends up.
It's just the change that's taking place within the Democratic Party. And again, we talked about it a minute ago, just this age divide, under 45, over 45, the socialism thing, just like, again, it really was jarring for me, to see that. So, I think the sense of the limits of sort of politics that younger Democrats have and the kind of bounds that they need to operate in. I'm trying to learn what they think they are because they're very different than my sense of what they are.
It's all about affordability, though, right? I mean, because if you offer somebody a free bus ride and they're already stressed out about 5 other things economically in their life, they don't really care what it's called, right? They just want the voucher, right?
Yeah, and I think it's context too, right? Like I'm saying my memory of growing up, I grew up in enough of the 80s. I was, to have absorbed we didn't want to be one of those Eastern Bloc countries. We didn't want.
No. The height of the Cold War was.
Yeah,
that was a time to be alive.
I was at the end. I was glasnost. Okay, I'm the glasnost kid. But I just think even then we didn't immediately go into a political climate in the 90s where Democrats were like, okay, let's go right back to it now. I mean, that's the 90s were DLC centrism, Clinton moderation, markets, and all of this.
Sure.
I think Democrats went through a long period of that. Yeah. And I think what I've tried to, just in terms of understanding politics, which is my interest, what I've had to kind of adjust myself to is, I would say, from 2010 on, I think things have taken a turn. And I think there's a lot of factors that went into that. One is distance from the kinds of events I'm talking about. 2 is the crash, the meltdown of 2008. I think all sorts of other issues of affordability that have come with that. College debt becomes a big thing for a certain segment of the population. And then there's a generational, aspect of it too, which I think is, we talk about Mamdani right now, Mamdani, Cuomo. There's all sorts of different contrasts, but one is, somebody who feels incredibly new and somebody who feels like an incredibly familiar part of an incredibly familiar society. You couldn't. They each embody that.
No, that's right.
And I think that power.
You couldn't script it better. If Mamdani wins, he'd be the youngest mayor in 100 years. If Cuomo wins, he'd be the oldest mayor ever.
There you go.
So there you have it. Listen, great talking with you, brother.
Yeah,
let me know when you're ready to start talking some more about 2026, because we're going to be trying to stay on top of that. That's obviously New York City is what we care about, but the November 5th, in addition to dealing with the transition as we head for whatever's going to happen, whoever's going to be the next mayor, 2026 is going to be prime time for us.
You got it. We'll talk about it at Aqueduct sometime. How's that?
Okay, good enough. Belmont, better track.
Yeah.
Okay, good enough. Do you want more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of New York City and beyond? Check out our New York One podcast channel in the description. And hit subscribe to let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues.